Imagine this. You're sitting at a dinner table with people you've known your entire life, family, childhood friends, the people who say they know you best. But tonight, something feels off. You listen as they talk about you, your personality, your habits, your future, even your past. But as they speak, a strange tension creeps in. They're not wrong, exactly, but they're not right either. It's like watching someone draw a portrait of you from memory, but they've painted a stranger, a familiar-looking stranger. You nod along, you smile, you even laugh at the right moments. But something inside you is cracking, because somewhere deep down, beneath your trained responses and socially approved identity, a quieter voice whispers a truth you've ignored for years. This isn't who you are. It never was. And yet, you keep playing along. Why? Not out of politeness, not out of fear, but because part of you believes the lie too. That voice, the quiet one, has been drowning beneath a chorus. Your mind has rehearsed since childhood. Be this, don't be that. This is how you should feel. That thought is dangerous. This is who you are. But who wrote this script you keep following? Who designed the mask you now wear so convincingly? Even you can't remember what your face looked like before it. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Terrifying, not enlightening, not empowering, terrifying. But why? Why would becoming your true self be terrifying? Shouldn't it be liberating? And that, right there, is the contradiction most people never dare to question. You've been taught that authenticity is the goal. Be yourself, they say. Live your truth. But behind those catchy mantras hides a deeper fear that if you actually looked into the abyss of your own soul, you wouldn't like what you saw, or worse, you wouldn't recognize it at all. What if the version of yourself you call real is nothing more than a defense mechanism, a careful construction assembled from parental expectations, social pressure, childhood trauma, and the unconscious need to belong? What if you've confused adaptation for authenticity? Now, imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the person you've been protecting, promoting, and perfecting for decades is a lie. Not a malicious lie, not even a conscious one, but a lie so convincing, so deeply woven into the fabric of your psyche, that questioning it feels like a threat to your very existence. This is the kind of lie Carl Jung spent his life exploring, not as a conspiracy of external manipulation, but as a tragic necessity of human survival. A psychological cocoon we weave around ourselves to make life bearable, even if it costs us our soul. Because the truth, the real truth, you were never meant to be just one thing. Your mind yourself was designed to be wild, contradictory, even monstrous. You carry both shadow and light, rage and compassion, primal instinct and divine intuition. But the world asks you to choose, to be simple, to be understandable, to be one version of yourself forever. And so, over time, you cut away the parts that didn't fit. You buried urges, censored thoughts, suppressed desires. You learned to smile when you wanted to scream, to conform when you wanted to rebel. And eventually, you forgot there was ever another way to live. But what if you didn't have to live that way anymore? What if the person you've been all these years isn't your true self, but your false center, a necessary illusion crafted to keep you safe, but never to make you whole? And what if Jung was right, that your wholeness lies not in perfection, but in integration, in reclaiming the very parts of yourself you were taught to fear? Ask yourself, when did you first learn to perform rather than feel? Whose approval became more important than your own intuition? What parts of yourself did you exile just to survive? And most chilling of all, if you stripped away every label you've been given, every expectation, every role, every carefully curated trait, what would be left? Would you even recognize the person staring back at you? This is not just a personal dilemma. It's a species-wide condition, a hidden sickness masquerading as normalcy, a mass psychosis in which we all play roles in a theater, built by fear, conformity, and repression. But the curtain is beginning to shake, and somewhere inside you, something is waking up. Something dangerous, something sacred, something real. The question now is not whether the lie exists. The question is, are you ready to see it? Let's go deeper into the psychological machinery behind this illusion, and the ancient forces that keep it alive inside you, even now. Look closely beneath the layers of your everyday decisions, your emotions, your sense of self. There is a presence there. Not a spirit, not a voice, but a blueprint etched into your mind like ancient ink on fragile parchment. It tells you what's right to feel, what's wrong to desire, what's acceptable to be. But who wrote it? The answer lies not in your childhood, or even in your parents' expectations. It lies in the evolutionary wiring of your psyche and in the silent contract you signed with the world. The moment you became conscious of yourself, Carl Jung called it the persona mask we create to meet the demands of society. At first, it's harmless. A child smiles when praised, quiets when scolded. The brain learns. Adaptation means survival. We become what earns us love. We hide what earns us pain. Over time, the mask fuses with the face, but the persona is not you. It is merely a social necessity, a compromise your true self made in order to belong. And behind it, the parts of you that didn't make the cut, the rage, the lust, the fear, the madness, the creativity, the divine, the unacceptable. Jung called this the shadow and warned that what we fail to integrate, we inevitably project onto the world. That person you hate for being arrogant? Perhaps it's your own suppressed confidence calling back. That woman you envy for her freedom? Maybe it's the part of you that still longs to run barefoot through life. The parts we exile become the monsters we fear first within, then without. But how did we get here? Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed human suffering stemmed from will, the blind, striving force of nature that drives all living things. To him, life was an endless cycle of desire, disappointment, and momentary relief. We chase illusions, call them meaning, then fall into despair when they slip through our fingers. Carl Jung didn't fully agree, but he didn't dismiss the tragedy either. He believed the psyche isn't just driven by will, but by symbols, myths, archetypes, ancient forces older than logic, older than language. And these forces, they shape your life, even if you've never heard their names. You didn't choose your persona. It emerged from the archetypes you absorbed, long before you had the language to question them. The hero expected to succeed. The good girl expected to obey. The martyr expected to suffer. The savior expected to carry others' pain. The caretaker expected to abandon herself. You wore these masks like armor, thinking they'd protect you from pain. But over time, they became prisons. This is the lie that governs your mind, that you must become something other than yourself to be worthy. This is not your fault. You were taught to fear your true self by a society that fears authenticity. Real people are unpredictable. Real emotions are messy. Real thoughts are dangerous. Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. To stand alone, to think independently, to confront the truth of your own being, that is a radical act, one most people avoid their entire lives." Why? Because the mind craves order, certainty, control, and the self is chaos. To face the truth of who you are requires descending into the underworld of your own psyche. It means meeting the parts of you that were banished long ago, the child who cried too loudly, The teenager who burned with unexplained anger, the adult who sometimes stares at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering, is this it? You were taught to silence them. But Jung believed you must listen. Because the longer you repress these voices, the louder they become. They appear in nightmares, in self-sabotage, in addictions, in toxic relationships, in the quiet despair that creeps in when everything on the outside looks perfect. But inside, something feels broken. What you call anxiety might be the soul's rebellion against a life built on falsehoods. What you call depression might be the mourning of your unlived life. This is not pop psychology. It is not about positive thinking. Jung's psychology is brutal, honest, sacred. He believed wholeness requires confrontation, not comfort, integration, not avoidance. And until you face your shadow, until you question the persona you've mistaken for your soul, you will remain trapped in the illusion. You will keep living a life someone else designed, playing a role someone else assigned, seeking approval from people who don't even know you exist beneath the mask. This is not a small problem. It is the problem, the root of so many inner wars. And unless it is unearthed, understood, and dismantled, it will keep winning. But you don't have to surrender. You can question the script. You can descend into the forgotten corridors of your own psyche. You can reclaim what was lost. You can become whole again. But first, you must see the cost of staying asleep. You must witness how this lie is shaping not just your thoughts, but your entire reality. You're not the only one wearing a mask. The entire world is. And that's where we go next. Into the unseen consequences of this lie. How it silently rewires your perception, your choices, your future, and even your sense of what's real. Imagine standing in a hall of mirrors. Each reflection shows a slightly altered version of yourself. Some more flattering, some grotesque, some eerily lifeless. You try to find the original, but no matter how hard you look, you can't tell which one is real anymore. They all look familiar. They all lie just enough to convince you they're true. This is how the lie operates, not as a single falsehood you can point to, but as a reality distortion field that silently, methodically, warps everything you perceive. You don't just believe the lie, you live it. Every thought you think, every feeling you have, every goal you chase is filtered through it. The persona you created, the mask you wear, doesn't sit on the surface. Over time, it rewires the way you see the world itself, until eventually, the real you, the unlived self, becomes not just forgotten, but invisible. This is not some poetic metaphor. Modern neuroscience confirms it. The brain is not an objective observer of reality. It's a prediction machine, constantly interpreting the world through internal models built from past experiences, social norms, and subconscious fears. These models aren't neutral. They're biased. They're personalized. They don't just reflect your reality, they create it. And if your inner model is built on a lie, then everything you see becomes a reflection of that lie. That's how deep it goes. Consider this. Have you ever had a moment where someone paid you a genuine compliment and you immediately dismissed it? Not because they were wrong, but because it didn't fit the story you'd been telling yourself? That story, I'm not lovable. I'm a burden. I'm only valuable when I succeed. That's not just insecurity. That's the lie acting as reality. And here's the tragedy. When the lie becomes too familiar, the truth starts to feel foreign. If someone tries to show you a mirror that reflects your real self, your wholeness, your potential, your buried desires, you will often reject it. Not because you prefer the lie, but because the lie has become safer. The illusion offers certainty. The truth demands transformation. Carl Jung warned that anything unconscious will rule your life. and you will call it fate. This is the unseen consequence. A life ruled not by conscious choice, but by unconscious programming. You walk paths you never chose. You sabotage relationships that ask too much truth of you. You stay in jobs that suffocate your soul. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because the lie you absorbed became your internal compass. And just like a compass that's been magnetized in the wrong direction, it still spins, but it never leads you home. Think about the goals you pursue. Are they truly yours? Or are they echoes of what others told you would make you successful, worthy, or normal? The partner you dream of, the house you want, the way you dress. Even your deepest ambitions show many of them are shaped by cultural archetypes rather than personal truth. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith a psychological state in which people lie to themselves in order to avoid the anguish of freedom. Because real freedom isn't just about doing what you want, it's about confronting the terrifying possibility that everything you've built your life upon might not be real. Most people don't want that kind of freedom. It's too raw, too demanding. So they settle for roles. Roles offer structure, identity, belonging, but in the process, they amputate their authenticity. This creates not just personal suffering, but societal dysfunction. We build cultures based on curated identities. We judge others through the lens of our own unresolved shame. We enforce conformity, not out of cruelty, but out of a collective fear of the unknown self. And so the lie reproduces itself, generation after generation. We teach our children to suppress their curiosity in the name of obedience. We reward emotional numbness and call it maturity. We worship achievement, but ignore the cost of disconnection. We stigmatize introspection. We pathologize mystery. We mock vulnerability. And yet, we wonder why the world feels so hollow. This is not just philosophy. This is existential emergency. Because the longer the lie governs your mind, the more disconnected you become, not just from yourself, but from reality itself. You begin to fear silence. You over-identify with thoughts. You numb your body to escape your feelings. You drown discomfort in noise, consumption, distraction. But no matter how fast you run, the emptiness follows. And here's the cruel twist. The more pain you feel, the more the lie tells you that you're the problem, that you're broken, weak, failing. So you double down. You work harder, smile wider, perform better. But the mask gets heavier, and the shadow grows louder, until, eventually, it breaks through. Sometimes in a panic attack, sometimes in burnout, sometimes in a sudden, inexplicable decision to leave everything behind. Carl Jung described this moment as the start of individuation, the sacred unraveling of the false self. It often begins with collapse, a breakdown, a dark night of the soul. But it is not the end. It is the beginning. Because once you've seen the lie for what it is, not a flaw, but a wound you can begin to heal. Not by erasing the past, but by reclaiming the parts of yourself that were lost to it. But to do that, you must rebel, not against the world, not against others, but against the story inside your head that tells you who you are. And that's where we go next, because the only way out is through the fire of truth. You must burn the mask. You must befriend the shadow. You must become the self you were never allowed to be. Now, we step into that rebellion. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that changes everything. The kind that breaks the spell. You don't escape a lie by fighting it head on. Lies grow stronger when you struggle with them directly, because they feed on your attention, your fear, your resistance. No, the lie must be outgrown. And that begins with one word: rebellion. But not the kind you've been taught to fear. Not rage, not chaos, not impulsive destruction. The rebellion Jung pointed to is internal, quiet, relentless. It starts the moment you say, "I will no longer betray myself just to be accepted by a world that never knew who I was." That's when the prison cracks. For most, the rebellion begins in confusion. You question the job that once defined you. You wake up next to someone and wonder why the silence between you is louder than any fight. You scroll endlessly through screens and feel more alone with each click. What once gave you meaning now tastes like ash. Good. That discomfort is not dysfunction, it's awakening. Jung believed that true healing is not about removing symptoms, but revealing the self. When the persona cracks, the shadow begins to speak, and its voice is raw with buried truth. You begin to feel emotions you had long anesthetized. The grief of a lost identity, the terror of the unknown, the longing to finally come home to yourself. This is where most turn back, because the path to wholeness doesn't start with light. It starts with descent into your pain, into your contradictions, into your forgotten desires and ancient wounds. But what you find there isn't just darkness. You find your fire. This is the turning point, the first act of rebellion. Radical self-honesty. You stop pretending. You stop performing. You stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. You begin telling the truth, even when your voice trembles. You start asking dangerous questions. What if my job, my degree, my relationship, my dream was never really mine? What if I've spent my entire life chasing safety instead of purpose? What if the real me was exiled so long ago? I need to rediscover them from scratch. These aren't midlife crises. These are soul revolutions. And once the questions begin, they don't stop. Because the lie cannot coexist with the truth. Eventually, the rebellion deepens. You no longer want to just feel better. You want to know who you are, beneath the layers, beneath the programming. You realize that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to be someone else. This remembering is dangerous because it restores power. And the system doesn't want you powerful. Neither does your ego. Because real power doesn't come from control. It comes from integration. It means meeting the shadow not as an enemy, but as an orphaned part of you. It means reclaiming your anger, your sadness, your envy, your ecstasy, not to indulge them blindly, but to learn their wisdom. Jung called this the process of individuation, the sacred journey of unifying all parts of the psyche into a coherent, embodied self. And to do this, you must become intimate with discomfort. You must sit in silence long enough to hear your own soul speak. You must walk away from validation and learn to be misunderstood. You must allow parts of you to die, identities, roles, even relationships that no longer align with truth. This is not self-help. This is self-initiation, a rebirth. And like all rebirths, it requires a death. The second act of rebellion is rewriting the story. You were handed a script. Now, you begin to edit. You no longer ask, "Who should I be?" You ask, "What is true for me right now?" You no longer chase status or approval. You choose experiences that awaken, challenge, and expand you. You redefine success not as perfection, but as presence. Not as achievement, but alignment. You learn to say no, not out of rejection, but out of reverence for your own energy. You learn to say yes, not to what's comfortable, but to what's alive. And perhaps most terrifying of all, you begin to trust your own inner voice, even when it contradicts your upbringing, even when it shocks your friends, even when it defies everything you were told is normal. Because the third act of rebellion is this: you stop waiting for permission. You stop asking others to validate your becoming. You realize there is no map, No guru, no perfect plan. The path is made by walking it. The truth reveals itself in real time, and so you live, messily, authentically, awake. This doesn't mean you never falter. In fact, the deeper you go, the more illusions you'll have to shed. The ego will resist. The world will misunderstand. But now, you're not afraid of the mess, because you've seen the alternative. A life built on a beautiful lie. And once you've tasted truth, no lie will ever satisfy you again. You begin to see others differently too. You recognize the mask in their eyes, the weight of their performance. You stop trying to fix them. You simply live your truth so loudly that it gives them permission to explore theirs. This is the ripple of rebellion. It starts in silence. It ends in revolution. A revolution of inner power, of wholeness, of sovereignty. You become a mirror that doesn't distort or flatter, but reflects something rare and dangerous. What it looks like to be real. And the world needs that, desperately, because every person who wakes up weakens the lie. Every integrated soul becomes a light in the darkness, not a beacon of perfection, but a fire that says, you're not alone. You're not broken. You are more than they told you. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who they need you to be, not who you were trained to be, but who you were before the world got to you. And now you're beginning to remember. But there is one final truth, one final realization that burns brighter than all the rest. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. It's not just about breaking the lie. It's about discovering what was always there, waiting beneath it. Let us go there, know into the ultimate truth, the final, most powerful revelation that changes everything. What if you were never broken? Not for a single moment. Not during your darkest nights, your most paralyzing fears, your deepest shame. Not when you failed. Not when you lied. Not even when you forgot who you were. What if none of that meant you were flawed? What if it meant you were becoming? Here it is, the ultimate truth. The one that undoes the lie at its roots. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. That's the revelation Jung kept pointing toward, again and again. That your suffering, your chaos, your inner fragmentation, they are not evidence of failure. They are the very terrain of transformation. You weren't meant to be pure. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness includes the shadow. You were born with a self that was vast, capable of contradiction, paradox, rage, desire, love, insight, and madness. But the world could not handle your vastness, so it carved you down to something manageable. And you believed that version. You called it your personality. You called it me. But it was never you. It was a container, a survival strategy. Now, standing here, after everything you've endured, there's something else stirring. A memory of your original self. The self that existed before shame, before performance, before the mask. Not innocent but undefended. Not perfect but true. This is the moment the lie collapses under the weight of its own smallness. You see, the lie had to convince you that truth was dangerous, because if you knew the truth, the game would end. The game of endless self-improvement, of chasing worth, of begging for love, of becoming better. But the final, most powerful realization is this. You don't need to become better. You need to become you. There is no higher calling, no greater task. The soul doesn't crave perfection. It craves integration, the fierce, tender embrace of every part you were told to hide. The rebel, the dreamer, the wild one, the silent witness, the secret keeper, the inner child who never got to scream, the elder within, who always knew. They're all still with you, waiting, Not to be erased, but to be welcomed back. And here's the paradox that turns everything inside out. You were never meant to fix yourself. You were meant to remember yourself, to recover the parts, to re-inhabit the truth, to stand, not as a product of culture, but as a force of nature. Because the deepest truth Jung gave us, the one people misunderstand the most, is this: the goal of life is not to transcend your humanity, but to become fully human. That means feeling what you're afraid to feel, saying what you're afraid to say, loving in the face of loss, creating without knowing who will understand, standing alone if you must, burning down everything that isn't aligned, and walking forward, not with certainty, but with presence. Because there's no destination, no final form. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a mystery to be lived. In this realization, the weight falls away. The mask drops, not with drama, but with quiet grace. You see the lie for what it was, a necessary cocoon. You bless it, you let it go. And in its place, not clarity, not perfection, not peace but truth. Raw, real, unshakable. This is the moment Jung meant when he said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." So you choose to speak, even when your voice shakes. You choose to feel, even when it hurts. You choose to stay awake, even when the dream of the lie whispers seductively in your ear. You choose truth over comfort, wholeness over approval, self over survival. And that choice changes everything. Because once you become real, truly real, you become untouchable in the best possible way. The world can no longer manipulate you through shame, through trends, through hollow promises of belonging. You belong to yourself now. And here's the final gift. When you live from your truth, you free others to do the same. You become the antidote to the lie, not by preaching, but by embodying. People feel it. They sense something ancient, something wild, something sacred in your presence. They might not understand it, but they remember it because it lives in them too. It's contagious, not the lie, the truth. So now you stand on the edge. Behind you is the old life, the roles, the persona, the subtle ache of disconnection. In front of you is the unknown, messy, alive, unfinished. There's no script, no map, just the pulse of something real inside your chest. The invitation is simple. Live from that. No more numbing, no more shrinking, no more betraying your soul for applause. You don't need permission. You don't need a plan. You are already enough. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of your story. The one you were born to write. The one only you can live. The one that doesn't need to be explained, only embodied. And as you walk away from the lie, you don't need to burn it down. You outgrow it. You leave it behind like old skin. And you keep walking, not toward perfection, but toward home.